Born in India and educated in the United States, Dr. Cavalli's background is an eclectic blend of education and experience, including a PhD in Human Systems and Organizational Development, an MBA, a BS in Physics, and 3 decades in aerospace as a systems engineer and project manager. After receiving her MBA, she led independent research and development projects and created strategic technology roadmaps before moving into knowledge management and organizational learning, training, and development. Along the way, she also mentored many young women in engineering and coached managers and executives. Outside of work, Cynthia studied mythology, Jungian psychology, and shamanic dreaming, frequently conducting dream workshops with her husband, Tom Cavalli, an author and Jungian therapist. These varied roles and experiences have led to a passion for personal and organizational transformation, which informs her work as a coach and consultant today. Cynthia's doctoral research explored the experience of meaning and life-changing synchronicities from the twin perspectives of Jungian psychology and organizational complexity. She developed a framework integrating the two, which she uses to teach individuals and organizations the stages, patterns, and dynamics of the transformation cycle, and how to optimize the value and creative potential of uncertainty. Dr. Cavalli founded C3 to help individuals and organizations better understand and navigate the challenging cycles of uncertainty and transformation. Dr. Cavalli enjoys providing leadership coaching to corporate executives, offering systems and complexity workshops to groups, and guiding individuals through uncertain passages of life using dreams, synchronicity, stories, and mythology. She is passionate about achieving global transformation through her personal inner work. And I have had the honor and pleasure of hearing this fantastic doctor present. And I am so pleased to have you here today, Dr. Cavalli, and I'm going to go ahead and pass everything over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hillary. As I'm listening to that introduction, I'm struck by how old I am to have done all those things. But welcome to everybody who's on the call. I wish I could see you, but I understand the format, and I'm sure I'll be able to connect with you later, or I hope so. The title of the talk, today is actually not the talk that's going to happen at summer session. This is just a preview. So I'm shortening the title to be Navigating Real World Complexity Summer Session Preview. So I hope none of you are disappointed that but I will allude to the new currency of leadership and give you plenty to think about, and hopefully you'll join me at summer session and find out all the other details. So I have here on my title slide, it's a picture of a fractal. I'm sure lots of you are aware of it. Now, I'm well aware that I'm speaking about systems to people who got their doctorate in systems. So I'll just be covering like kind of an overview and a review, and then sharing my approach to this work so that you can see how I'm thinking about it, and the kind of people that are coming forward and how it's helping them. So there are 3 foundational elements to my approach. 2 basic disciplines are complex systems or complex adaptive systems, which involve systems and complexity. And then I like to use Jung's framework, his psychological framework, and his framework of individual development, because I appreciate the depth and the way that it incorporates both unconscious and conscious spheres of life. And then my special research area is transformation. And it didn't start out that way, but it ended up being all about transformation. And it was interesting to me that it came around to transformation, and that's what my work has become. That's the work that I do now, more transformational coaching than consulting even lately. So I'll be talking a little bit about the patterns and some of the secrets. And there will be much more filled in at the summer session. And throughout this whole talk, I want you to keep in mind the impact to leadership, because that's really what the talk at summer session is about. What kind of leaders are we developing? Are they being groomed appropriately for the kind of challenges that they're going to face in their organizations? So keep that question in mind as we go through the different slides. So we'll start off with systems and complexity, just kind of a top level review. What is a system? Just to level set, and it's an interdependent collection of components, or often called agents. They serve a common goal, and they form a unified pattern. Excuse me. So I have here a couple, some different examples. One's an operating system with the computer, the keyboard, and everything, a mechanical system, and the solar system. So we'll be talking about complex adaptive systems. You'll see that, oh, excuse me. I'm getting over a cold. I think I'm gonna have to do a cough drop here.
No problem. That it's going around right now with the cold. So thank you, Cynthia, for.
I'm sorry. I just.
Oh no, it's fine. It's so I see that Carol and Gayla, thank you so much for joining us today. If you do get a chance, at the bottom of your screen there is a Q&A. I see that someone has used that already, and there's also a chat function, so feel free to go ahead and take a look at that. And will we get today's deck? Yes, you will. I will be following this webinar. I will send a copy of the presentation along with a link to the video as soon as I'm able to get that. Usually it takes about a week or so to get that together. So yes, we will make sure and get you that information. And looks like we are ready to go.
Okay, I'm so sorry about that. I was doing great, and then of course right when the webinar starts I have a dry spot. So complex adaptive systems, we'll break that apart and talk about that a little bit. The system elements are networked, and they interact dynamically. They're in relationship with each other and the environment. So let's talk about complexity first. Oh, so you have all kinds of agents. You know, we talked about the agents in the cell, in a system. These are the system elements. You have molecules, cells, animals, humans, even technology. Another aspect of the system is that there are feedback loops. You have positive feedback loops where you feed something, it's hungry, it keeps growing. It's positive because the more you feed it, the more it grows. The more you feed it, the more it grows. Negative feedback loops have kind of a check. So there's like a thermostat. So the body temperature rises, the body sweats, then the temperature drops, and so on and so forth. That's called a negative feedback loop. Because the ability to adapt to the complex adaptive systems. Here you have a balancing loop, like with the thermostat. Means that your positive, so your positive feedback reinforces system behavior, but the negative feedback corrects, and it allows the system to adapt, learn, evolve. So when you're talking about organizations, I always like to look for what are the negative feedback loops in place in terms of communication, policy rollout. Are there avenues for the organization to receive negative feedback? Because if there are not, then they're not getting the news that they might need to self-correct, and it'll make them less robust over time, and that's a real problem. So you'll often find that there are people who don't like to get bad news. Well, they're really setting up their organization to ultimately fail because they have no avenue for receiving this adaptive negative feedback. Complicated and complex are different things. So on the left, you have a complex ecosystem with a predator and fish. And on the right, you have this complicated system, which is like a self-operating napkin. It's a picture I saw on a TEDx talk. And it was funny because there's all this stuff going on, but it is not a complex system. Here's an example difference. On the left, we have a complicated system, an automobile system. On the right, we have an ant colony, or part of an ant colony. Similarities between the two: the system components interact with each other to serve a common goal or purpose. The system requires energy and puts out waste. But there are a lot of differences. The system on the right interacts with the environment. It takes in information and acts on it. Is there a food source over here? No, then we have to move to where there is a food source. Is there a threat to our colony's safety? If there is, then we have to deal with that. On the left, the car system only operates that way if the designers have input that capability, and then the user has to use it. So there's also another property. If you'll notice that the components of the car system are highly specialized with respect to function. Each part is highly specialized. But if you look at the ants, they all kind of look the same. And they can, ostensibly they're interchangeable. The functionality resides in the intelligence of the system and the way it comes together, as opposed to a car system. So that's a major difference. You also have this ability for the system on the right to self-organize and have this property called emergence that we'll talk about in just a bit. Excuse me. So the system on the right has a potential to evolve, to grow, and develop. For complex adaptive systems, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. I believe that. So the complex systems, they're all around. They're biological systems, but they're not necessarily. They can also be non-biological. Social systems are complex systems. Key features: decentralization, simple agents, the property of emergence, which is a function of this bottom-up collective effect, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. Self-organization. The system operates and changes on its own. So as I'm talking about this, imagine the kind of leader that you would need. For example, the car system on the left versus the self-organizing system on the right. Principles of complex adaptive system behavior. You have the simple components. The agents of the system are simple relative to the whole system, as opposed to the car parts, which are fairly sophisticated. Control is decentralized. You have a flat hierarchy, democratic, self-organizing. Leadership is distributed throughout the system. It's bottom-up rather than top-down. Now, I'm sure all of you have worked in organizations or had bosses. How many bosses understand that leadership should be distributed and that the power of leadership resides across the organization rather than within the top leader? I've worked for a lot of organizations where that would not be welcome news. And you have these feedback loops that facilitate corrective adaptive behavior. This is the key attribute that allows the system to evolve. If you don't have something like that, then your organization is not going to evolve, it's not going to grow, and it's not going to be able to respond to changing environmental or market conditions. So you're not going to be able to remain competitive as well. Now, this kind of dynamic environment is especially, you can especially see it in organizations that are knowledge organizations. You have it in more manufacturing production type organizations too, and that seems to be the thrust, moving towards knowledge organizations. But It's especially critical for knowledge organizations. There's also nonlinear interaction between the components, between the system agents, especially when you're talking about people. And small fluctuations can lead to drastic changes and have drastic impact. So that's really critical. It's helpful to understand these dynamics and to study them. And that's partly what chaos theory does. Chaos theory is a discipline within complexity. And there are patterns to all of those things. And you can, when you study the patterns, you can start to recognize if something like that is going on in your organization. So it's really important to have that, have an understanding of the basic. So here's an example of distributed control. These are both complex systems because they involve people. On the left, you have a classroom that is led by a teacher, the old traditional model where the teacher does all the teaching and instructs the students, and then the students follow the instructor. On the right, you have peer-based learning format where the teacher is more of a guide and a mentor and helps the students figure things out. And so this kind of depicts what these two different styles of teaching would be, and you can have that in an organization. The example on the left is more maybe possible or effective if you have a production or manufacturing type organization, whereas the one on the right is more effective for a knowledge organization. Examples of complex systems, these are all non-biological systems. There's that one on the left is a for over 3 system that for all intents and purposes is basically alive. It takes in energy, it gives off energy, it sustains its shape basically. And this picture on the top is the image of a storm on Saturn, and it's hexagonal in shape. I mean, it's really remarkable. These are kind of alive, right? They have a life of their own. They're known as dissipative structures. So one last principle of the complex adaptive system that I find to be especially exciting is that they display emergent behaviors. I'll talk a little bit more about what they are, but basically you have this spontaneous, radical reorganization of the system. It can happen very fast, instantaneously even sometimes. Some of the emergent properties that result are information processing, evolution and learning, and even hierarchical organization. So people tend to think of hierarchies as patriarchal and kind of have a negative view, but not all hierarchies are bad. Some of them are emergent. They emerge naturally out of the system behavior. So it's important to recognize if you have an organization that is imposing a hierarchy, that's not the same as where you have an emergent hierarchy that comes spontaneously out of the behavior of the system. So here's an example of emergence that I love. It was, I heard Kevin Kelly giving this example. A lot of people use it, but it's a really good one. Say you have a water molecule. You can study the properties of that water molecule as deeply as you want, but you're never going to be able to guess all the properties that water has when you have a glass of those water molecules, when you have millions of them and they comprise a glass. You're not going to be able to understand the behavior of the water molecules when they're amassed like that, the way the surface tension behaves, what it looks like, or that water tastes good, that it's essential for life, that it quenches thirst. You can't guess any of those. Those are emergent properties of water that only come into being when you have this many of them. And similarly, you can't guess by looking at that when you freeze water, that it actually expands rather than shrinks like every other liquid, and that it would float. Be able to look at a glass of water and figure out that if you had millions and billions of glasses of water, into have the kind of water you have in the world's oceans, that you would now be affected by the moon, and you'd have tidal effects. All of these are emergent properties. The behavior at the higher level of the system is impossible to predict from the lower level behavior, and those are qualities are known as emergent properties. That's magical to me, because there you have the chance for something new to enter the picture. So when you're thinking in terms of evolution and how how reality comes into being, you can start to see that I was schooled in physics, and I had this bias as a young physics student that everything that existed could be explained in terms of the interaction of molecules and atoms, and that's simply not the case because of these emergent properties. So this was a real breakthrough insight for me, which I appreciate. Here's an example of emergence with ants. You have a single ant, nothing, notices there's a break in the
Cynthia, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but the sound is cutting out.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No, you know what? I'm wondering if it might possibly be I don't know if the mouse is moving or the slide transition, so it's kind of cutting in and out.
Okay.
Yes.
Should I speak so right now when I'm talking, it's not cutting in and out?
It's perfect right now. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I'll try to not speak as I'm changing slides, and then.
Yes, let's try that.
Okay.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt. Thank you.
No problem. Oh, I can even not use the mouse. So, or maybe I can use this pad. So here you can see, and there's no boss, there's no leader, and there's no underlings. It's a flat hierarchy. They all spontaneously move and spring into action. And we know people do the same thing as well. So here's an example of emergence swarm behavior. You see it in birds and fish and flocking. You see it in people and the movement of traffic. Now, sometimes that's just pure chaos. But all you need is to follow a few very simple rules, and you can get order out of that chaos. Here are other examples of emergence. On the top right, excuse me, of dissemination of information through social networks. We all know how news travels, especially fake news. I mean, we got a big taste of that recently. You have spontaneous growth of cities, urban sprawl, slums, slum areas. These all follow fairly similar patterns that can be recognized. Economic herding behavior, the spread of disease through a population. These are all examples of emergent behavior. Now here's a chart that I think you might find familiar. I think I've seen it a lot of places, and it's looking at the organization as a complex adaptive system. Okay, so let's do this. On the far left, you have order, complete order. On the far right, you have complete chaos. Complexity is located in the region between those two. The more order you have, the more ossification you have, the more stagnation, nothing new can come in. The more chaos you have, the more instability you have, and the less anything sticks. So anything you do on the chaotic end isn't going to last. What you want is to sweet spot here between order and chaos, where you you can start to get this self-organizing capability. You can start to see some emergent properties. Hopefully, that's what you want to look for. Every organization I've worked in is interested in these emergent properties. They may not call it that, but everybody's looking for that competitive edge. They're looking for something new, something to make something that they have that no other company has. And yet they put these outdated old manager styles and leadership styles. They just completely embrace these old traditional styles of leadership that don't really serve those purposes. You have people that like to operate in this arena and don't know how to navigate this area at all. They don't know anything about it. They don't know how to act in that way. And so complexity, a definition from the Santa Fe Institute, it's a line of balance or transition point between order and chaos. It partakes of both. But the dynamics of complex systems, you really want these far from equilibrium conditions. So everything wants to move towards this kind of equilibrium, this perfect balance. Where the magic happens, where emergent properties arise, they only happen in far from equilibrium conditions. Companies don't like far from equilibrium conditions. Even tiny fluctuations can determine the outcome of the entire system that's in these far from equilibrium conditions. So it really matters what you do there. As the system becomes more complex, so you know, not just organizations, but my life moves between order and chaos, right? There's a cycling. That's how life moves, the cycling between order and chaos. So as the system becomes more complex, the more people that are involved, the more agents that are involved, it can reach a threshold of complexity after which the system begins to function in unpredictable ways. The initial conditions are lost. It's about to transition. It's about to transform. Emergence is about to happen at that point. So that's a really magical point. But it can also be hellish, you know, to actually experience it. Here we go. Far from equilibrium is that edge of chaos. It's where the magic can happen. So here's my depiction of what that might look like in an organization. Crisis, some disruption, some disruptive event, massive destabilization, and chaos. Then there's a critical threshold that's reached at that point. And success is not guaranteed. That's the thing. There's a good chance that the system could die. But hopefully it doesn't. If it manages to hold together, this spontaneous radical reorganization on emergent, and then the new system organization emerges from that. So here's another example of the transformation cycle. It can be at the individual level, it can be at a group level, and it's a grief cycle. As you can see, moving. I'm so sorry. The heart link keeps popping up. Sadness, despair, letting go. And then this breakthrough, wonder, imagination, vision. Other things are possible. So the most basic pattern of transformation, so we'll talk about transformation for a little bit now, is found in an old alchemical recipe, solvi et coagula. It's dissolving and falling apart, and then a coagulating and coming together. It's depicted in mythology by the Ouroboros. or the snake that's eating its tail. And this is the meaning of this is cycles that are falling apart and coming together to effect transformation. Now, think about the kind of leader that's comfortable with that falling apart. I don't know a lot of leaders that are comfortable with that falling apart. I think the people that I know who are the most comfortable with that kind of uncertainty are comedians. Honestly, the life of a stand-up comedian looks so hard to me, and I couldn't imagine, but they managed to pull it off somehow. And some artists also find themselves in that place. Never be afraid to fall apart, because it's an opportunity to rebuild yourself the way you wish you had been all along. I didn't realize Marilyn Monroe said this. Everything happens for a reason. People change so you can learn to let go. Things go wrong so you can appreciate them when they're right. And sometimes good things fall apart so better things can come together. Even if you may not agree with all of that, the last part I think has really proven out to be true. Falling apart, and this I've found to be really true, is not the end of the story, but it just might be the beginning of a new one. New beginnings and endings, they often look like the same place. It's a matter of perspective. At the center of your being, you have the answer. You know who you are, and you know what you want. So you need I think the new leader needs to be someone who, even if he's not entirely comfortable with chaos and the edge of chaos and waiting to see what happens, he recognizes that their value. So here's another pattern of transformation that should be familiar to everybody: the hero's journey, the call to adventure. And you'll notice that it follows the same pattern. There's a kind of call, and the old paradigm starts to change and come apart. You see this stuff is falling apart here. And then it moves to here, and then it moves to another coming together, and things are coming together. If you can stay with it, if you can manage to hold yourself together somehow through this abyss, this death and rebirth, you'll come together in a new way, and you'll have the gift of the goddess too. You get gifts along that path. So notice the big if. If you're able to manage to live through this death and rebirth, that's a big if. Back at the previous example of transformation, you have the same kind of thing. You have the falling apart, you have the coming together, and you have this void area down here. This area of uncertainty, and it's that uncertainty that makes the breakthrough possible. So what I do in the summer workshop, what I'll be doing, and what I do in my own work, is I predicate it on Jung's model of the psyche. And transformation in Jung's model of the psyche, here's Jung. He's known for the collective unconscious, archetypes, coining the terms introvert, extrovert, synchronicity. I like his model of the psyche. Basically, the psyche is everything that is conscious and unconscious. That's what the psyche is. So here I'm using this iceberg to depict the psyche. Consciousness is what's above the water. There's much more below the water line that can't be seen. Trust is that the unconscious wants to become conscious. So what's unconscious, the tension between these two is that what's unconscious wants to move up into consciousness. The vehicle of consciousness is the ego in the Jungian system. The ego is partly conscious and partly unconscious, and that's how we're able to know what's going on. But it's not a direct It's not straightforward, let's just say. And so some of how that happens is what I'll be covering in the summer session. Jung very famously said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. What wants to become conscious that's in the unconscious is very powerful, and it will come through. And what you need is an ego that's well developed and strong enough to withstand what's coming up from the unconscious. And there are patterns to that as well, and there are actual archetypes of development that show up at different developmental stages. And by studying those, you can prepare yourself for what wants to come through the unconscious. And so those are some of the things that I'll be talking about in the summer session. And in terms of leadership development, those are important qualities to keep in mind, even for yourself. So we'll be doing. So the principal process of transformation in Jung's psychology is called individuation. It's this process of integrating conscious and unconscious parts of the personality. The goal is wholeness through realization of the self, bringing to consciousness what is unconscious. Now imagine you have a leader in a knowledge organization, and she's in charge of a whole group of people, and she wants to do right by her people. And so she looks out for opportunities for them. She keeps them well informed of what's going on in the company. She makes sure they have developmental opportunities along the way that help to bring better income or fun jobs, fun opportunities, and develop them so that when they leave that organization, they're able to go to the next organization and at a higher level. Now, contrast that kind of a leader with another kind of leader who feels that it's a zero-sum game, and that if her employees achieve something, they do it at her expense, and so she is always striving to make sure she looks good over them. The difference in an organization is stark, and the kind of progress that you'll see, if I was the owner of the company, I would not want the second kind of leader, because she's not going to be doing well for my bottom line, right? So there are a lot of benefits to having leaders who know about their inner lives and about them. So individuation is known as happening in two stages. In the first half of life, it's all about adapting to life's demands and shoring up the ego, developing it, and separating it so that you're not confused. You don't confuse yourself with everybody else, so that you develop a sense of yourself. Excuse me. This is where Charlie Seashore's use of self work was really, really valuable. The second half of life is about now exploring the self and transforming the psychology, reuniting the ego and self. Now that you know who you are, you can now move on, and your ego actually has emergent properties as well. But it'll be clearer in the summers. So basically, here's what I'll be doing. I'll be applying Jung's framework of reality to leadership in complex organizations. And the main feature is self-knowledge. Knowing your strengths, knowing your weakness, knowing your shadow side, things that maybe people sense about you, like your mom, or your husband, or your wife, or your children, that you think are not you. They probably are you. They can see things about you that you may not recognize, as well as your gold. And what we do when we don't recognize things in ourselves that are real, that really belong to us, is we tend to project them onto other people. So there's a process of coming to terms with that, reintegrating that material into our own selves so that they can support us and help us. making peace with your demons, relationship dynamics. These are all the benefits of self-knowledge. Becoming comfortable with uncertainty. So the process of individuation will take you through the ringer, really. Now, it's not the same level of difficulty for everybody, but through that process, you learn to become comfortable with uncertainty. Maybe not comfortable, but you learn how to navigate it. There are tools that you can use. There are things that you can do, actions you can take. There are patterns to transformation. There are actions that are beneficial at each stage. There are actions to avoid at each stage. And you want to make sure that you take advantage of the benefits because they're only available at that place. So even at the worst parts of uncertainty, there are boons, there are gifts that are available there. You want to make sure that you get those gifts because all of that helps you move to the next stage. Okay, so that's all the time I'm going to take with that. I just this shows the old style and the new style of leadership. The old style is the top centralized control, lots of levels of hierarchy that are imposed from the top down. There may be a focus on efficiency and productivity, no way. Lots of metrics to measure everything and progress. The knowledge and effectiveness reside in the process. The idea is that anybody can come in and make it work, right? This style is more bottom-up, local, decentralized control, flat hierarchy, democratic, focus on spontaneous, collaborative problem solving, dynamic and emergent. The knowledge and effectiveness reside in the system agents. But now, there are going to be times when the old style is still effective. You need to get something done fast. You don't want people thinking about it or daydreaming about it. It just needs to happen fast, fast, fast. So there's still use for the old style. But in a knowledge organization where developments in technology are happening at such a rapid pace, you really want leaders who are well-informed, democratic, have knowledge of themselves so that they don't feel insecure about employees who know things that they don't. It's going to happen. In a knowledge organization, your employees are going to know more than you. And your job is to make sure that they have the resources available to them. Self-knowledge and relationship skills are critical. So you have production and manufacturing on this side and knowledge organizations on new stuff. So what I'll be doing in the summer session is going through the different archetypes, and we'll all be going through it together and developing ourselves and the leadership style that supports the knowledge organization, which is what I imagine most of the fielding grads will be working with organizations like that. So I'm looking forward to it, and I'm hoping that you'll be there too. Slide of me.
Fantastic. I'm glad that you put that last slide up. And Cynthia, I have a question for you.
Okay.
And when I was reading your bio, and then of course when you presented at winter session, I was so disappointed I didn't get a chance to attend it. But I'm really glad that I had a chance to be here to listen to this. And I'm completely fascinated of your transition from the aerospace industry to what you're doing now, and I can see the connection in your presentation, and it makes sense to me. But what was it that spurred you on to go from that industry into what you're doing now? Was there something that clicked for you? Or I'm just curious, and then along with that, I'm curious about from that, and then how did you find fielding, and how did fielding play into that decision?
So those are great questions with great stories attached to them. And I've been interested in Jung for maybe quite a few years, over 20 years, and his idea of synchronicity has really resonated in my life, and I found that fate plays a real hand. So the way that I found fielding was I had met all these women in my aerospace company that were getting their doctorates in organizational development, and I thought, wow, I think this is interesting enough that I could get a doctorate in this too. And I had decided to go to Pepperdine because a lot of them were going to Pepperdine, and I was invited by an executive at my company to attend an awards dinner for women in California. And the keynote speaker was, oh, now I'm blanking on her name, Judy. She was the president. She was a past president of Fielding. And so I attended, and she was wonderful. And she was talking about things that resonated with me. And I went up and spoke to her afterwards. And she said, you should go to the school. And I said, well, that's okay. I'm already planning to go somewhere else. And she said, well, here's why you should go to Fielding. And she sold me. So that's how I ended up at Fielding. Now, how did I end up, excuse me, moving away from engineering? You know, as a human being, and even studying physics, that whole world of science never was fully satisfying in explaining my experience of reality. I had dreams, I had uncanny experiences, intuitions, hunches, and they couldn't really say, science and technology really couldn't speak to those. Any answers that they gave were very unsatisfying. And so I began studying Jung and mythology, Joseph Campbell, and this was much more satisfying at a soul level. And so then I became interested in how do we bring these two disciplines together. So that's actually the kind of coaching clients. I've been doing a lot of coaching more recently, and that's who I've been getting is people. I had to navigate that territory for myself, and it was sometimes painful. And the dissertation actually helped me a great deal to work through a lot of that material. And now I find people who find me because I've given a talk about synchronicity or something like that, and they say, well, I want to learn more about it. And it ends up being about these other things, deeper things, having to do with purpose and meaning, and it's lovely. I love it. It's exciting, and I learn constantly every day. But I'll tell you, when I started studying it, I felt like I was falling in love. I felt like I had found just the best stuff ever. It felt like it was better than any fairy tale I'd ever read, and better than anything. It was just exciting. So I'm really happy to be doing this. I don't know if my presentation relayed the excitement I feel, but I really am excited to be working in this new field.
Well, I can tell. I can definitely tell. And I am, can you talk maybe a little bit about maybe I don't know if you have an average client base, but maybe talk about the different types of clients that you have, and the type of work that you're doing now, and just curious a little bit more about maybe the specific work and types of clients. You don't need to name any, but the types of clients that you might be working with.
Well, so when I got out of school, first of all, when I went into school, I was still working in aerospace, and I fully expected that I would have aerospace customers, that I would be working with corporate clients. And I did have a couple, assignments like that. But for the most part, that's not where the energy has been. What I've been finding is that people around the world, I don't know how they find me, but they'll do a Google search on maybe synchronicity, or they'll do a Google search on science and spirituality or something. I'm not even sure what words they use, but they'll find me, and then they'll say, I want to learn more about dreams. I want to learn more about using dreams in my life. I have vivid dreams. Or they'll say, I'm curious about this concept. It seems fascinating, and I don't know very much about it. Some of them are even really super left brain people, but something in them, I can only imagine that it's time, in terms of their personal development, it was time for them to go deeper. And so they find themselves I find them coming to me. And the way that I work is, it's a process of helping people develop a relationship with their inner life through dreams, through synchronicity, through things like meditation, artistic endeavors, but learning to facilitate that dialogue with their inner self and their inner depths. Through my dissertation research, I was blown away by what I found, and that was that life is not random, that each of us has a purpose and a destiny, that even if you may not know explicitly what it is, you can find out what you're supposed to be doing through your dreams, that dialogue with your dreams is invaluable to guiding us through our lives. So I still get freaked out and worried and woe is me when things don't go the way I think they should, even though I know better. But that has been my work, is helping people work with their dreams. And honestly, the more I help people with their dreams, the more confidence I have in the dialogue with the unconscious that becomes possible. Is that it? Did I answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, with that follow-up question with that, because we have just a few more minutes here, I'd love to finish this out, is your dissertation. And you kind of led right into that. Can you talk a little bit about your dissertation research and how that may have, how that affects your work today, or maybe changed the direction that you thought maybe you were going? I'm curious about that process for you.
Okay, so actually I was originally planning to do research on knowledge management and tacit knowledge, and how an organization can not, capture tacit knowledge. But when I wasn't working at the company any longer, I thought, well, I can study anything, and I became really interested in the phenomenon of synchronicity, which is where an inner event and an outer event coincide with no way of one causing the other. So an inner event can be like a dream or a hunch or premonition, and an outer event is just something that happens that matches that. So I thought, well, I'm curious about this. If it's a complex phenomenon, then there are certain properties that will be associated with it that have implications for the way reality works. So I thought, well, I would like to study this. So that's what I did. I put out a notice, and I got almost all my participants all at once, and began to do a deep dive, a phenomenological study of their experiences of synchronicity. And with a couple exceptions, the participants were not familiar with the terminology or the theoretical framework behind it. And their stories were just incredible. They were crazy, remarkable. And I began to see how, we live our lives forward. We live in the field of time, but it's not random. Or random just means chance happenings, but the chance has a place in life too. And I began to realize that this is the process of transformation, that life wants something from us. And actually, in terms of, just speaking in terms of biology and systems, life has invested a lot in each of us. It takes a lot of resources for a human being to have evolved, to have come into being. And then it takes a lot of resources to bring that human being up to a certain age. So this was one of the things that Jung mentioned very strongly, and that is the second half of life. What reason is there, if it's only about procreating, what reason is there for us to live into our 70s and 80s? It's because life is invested in us and wants something from us, and there is wisdom that we offer that life has no other way of accessing except through us. And so that's accessing that and making sure that each person that comes to this realization about who they are and what they're doing in the world, or are curious about it, that they can make good on that investment that life has made in each of us.
Wow, thank you. That's That's fascinating, and I feel very fortunate that I get to hear you again in July. So it looks like we're at the end of our hour, and Dr. Cavalli, I just want to thank you so much again for your time. It's always a pleasure working with you and hearing you speak. And for those who are online and will be attending a session, it is, let's see, Thursday, July 13th. And we look forward to having you there. And thank you again so much for your time and sharing your time and your knowledge and your expertise. You are very much appreciated.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much, Hillary.
Yes.
Thanks everybody who joined us.
All right. Take care and have a great evening.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.